Kia ora koutou, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to our webinar, Importing 101, Understanding the Basics of Food Importing. My name's Nikki, and I'm from the Food Importer Advice team, which is part of New Zealand Food Safety. I'm joined today by Ruben from our Imported Food Standards team. We've also got Catherine and Grace from the Food Importer Advice team with us. Today we are covering the basics of food importing, from registering as a food importer right through to all the checks you need to do until you are ready to import your food. Firstly, you need to register as a food importer with MPI. You then need to check the food you plan to import is safe and suitable and will meet requirements for sale in New Zealand. You'll need to ensure that you're meeting your responsibilities as a food importer and that you have checked your food can meet border requirements for import. Once you've completed all these steps, you should be ready to import food for sale. Firstly, a little background on food importing. The key rules for importing food that we will be talking about today come from two pieces of legislation. The Food Act 2014 applies to food made, imported and sold in New Zealand. It's there to ensure that food sold in New Zealand is safe and suitable for consumers, so this means that it won't make people sick. There are some regulations and notices that fall under the Food Act. The most important one for food importers is the Food Notice, requirements for registered food importers and imported food for sale. This notice explains the requirements for food importers and which foods need extra checks at the border. Since we're from New Zealand Food Safety, we'll mainly be focusing on these requirements today. The Biosecurity Act 1993 applies to all food that is imported into New Zealand. It applies to both food for sale and food for personal consumption or for other uses. It's there to protect New Zealand from harmful pests and diseases, those that could hurt our plants and animals. Biosecurity importing requirements are outlined in import health standards that outline what needs to be met for a product to be permitted entry into New Zealand. So if you've got a food product and you're wondering whether you can import it, the answer is it depends. So we'll go into more detail on what's required to import food into New Zealand, but before we do, it's helpful to understand this up front. The more biosecurity or food safety risk a food might pose, the more you'll need to show that you've managed those risks for it to be allowed in. If the food risk is really high, it might not be allowed in at all. This is particularly important when it comes to biosecurity. We're lucky in New Zealand that we don't have a lot of nasty pests and diseases that disrupt our animals, plants, and industry here. Staying free from those threats not only protects our environment and industries, but also helps maintain strong access to international markets when we export our own products. So we have some strict rules in place to help protect all this. Let's look at a couple of examples. So if you're importing something like a chocolate chip cookie, the cookie is cooked, shelf stable, and not likely to grow bacteria that could make people sick. It's also highly processed, so it's unlikely to carry plant or animal diseases. But if you're looking to import meat, things get more complex. Meat is considered a higher risk product. On the biosecurity side, we need to guard against serious diseases like foot and mouth disease that could harm our animal population and economy. And on the food safety side, we need to protect consumers from foodborne illnesses. That's why some meat products can only come in from certain approved countries and why it often needs official certificates from the exporting country to show it's free from those risks and safe to bring into New Zealand. Of course, getting the product into the country is only half the story. It also needs to meet the applicable requirements to be allowed for sale as food in New Zealand. We'll talk about how you can check this later in the presentation. So let's start looking at the steps we need to follow to be ready to import food for sale. The first step is to register as a food importer. This registration is with MPI and is a requirement under the Food Act. It's about registering you as the importer. This helps us to know who is importing food and who is responsible for ensuring the food is safe and suitable. We do not list which foods you plan to import, so you don't need to update this when you want to import a new food. You'll need to renew your registration every 12 months and make sure you keep your details with us up to date so we can send you the renewal information. To get registered, there is a single application form that you can use to both register as a food importer with MPI and get your importing client code with customs. Okay, now you have your registration, what else do you need to do? Before you start importing, you need to do a safety and suitability assessment of the food you want to import. Different foods have different risks and requirements, so you need to assess each type of food you want to import. This is about ensuring the food will be safe for consumption and suitable for sale. As mentioned, this needs to be done before you import the food. You need to keep records of your assessment, so make sure you have it written down and easy to find if anyone wants to see it. You also need to keep the assessments up to date. For example, if your supplier changes the product formulation or introduces new allergens, you'll need to update your assessment to consider those changes. So how do you do this assessment? So the main thing that you need to be confident on is that the food is safe and suitable and meets New Zealand requirements. You'll need to check that the food is free from hazards and safe for how it's going to be used, whether it's ready to eat or needs further processing. Hazards can change depending on the type of food and processing it goes through, so it's important to do some research on the common types of hazards in your product so you know what to look for and check they're managed. Next, you'll want to check it can meet the Food Standards Code. This includes checking the composition of the food. Some ingredients are allowed overseas, but not in foods here, for example. Some ingredients have limits for how much can be used or are only allowed in certain foods. There are also requirements for contaminants, additives, added vitamins and minerals, and anything that could be added or found in food. The Food Standards Code also has requirements for labelling. For things like labelling and allergen declarations, you need to know enough about the food to make sure the information is correct before you put it up for sale in New Zealand. Over-labelling is okay, but it needs to be correct and in English. You also need to check your supplier produces safe and suitable food. Are they registered with the MPI equivalent in their market? Do they have HACCP or third-party certifications that you can trust? Have they been involved in any recent recalls or food poisoning outbreaks? And will they tell you if they change their ingredients or if something goes wrong? After checking all these things, make sure you record your assessment and the outcome. Did you conclude the food is going to be safe and meet applicable requirements? If not, you can't import it. Conducting a safety and suitability assessment is a food importer responsibility in the Food Act. There are other responsibilities of food importers outlined in the Act. These include making sure you have safe and suitable storage and transport organised. You'll also need to keep records for traceability, so make sure you know where all your product has come from, including the supplier and manufacturer, and how to contact them. You'll also need to keep records of the batch information for your food, and of course, keep the records of your safety and suitability assessments. You'll need to keep your records for at least 4 years after you import the food. Finally, you need to have a recall plan in place and test it annually. This is in case something does go wrong with your food. Then you'll be prepared and quickly able to trace it, take it off the market, and protect consumers. Hopefully you won't need to do a real one, but you do need to be prepared. Finally, you'll need to check that you and the food you're importing can meet the border requirements to make sure it can come into New Zealand. Ruben is going to talk about the border requirements, so I will hand over to him.
Thank you, Nikki. There are several checks that will be done when your food is imported. The food will be checked for food safety clearance requirements, if it is a food that needs clearance at the border. Biosecurity clearance requirements, all foods will be checked for biosecurity criteria. Other requirements will be checked, such as customs requirements, or even things like CITES, which is about protecting endangered plants and animals. You will need to declare the intended use of the food. Is it for sale for human consumption? Or is it for animal consumption? Or maybe just a trade sample, or something for your personal use? And you will need to have all this information put into an import entry in the Trade Single Window system, also known as TSW. You can sign up to use the system yourself, or you might like to use a customs broker or freight forwarder to do this part for you. We mentioned on the last slide that food safety clearance requirements are checked. Food safety clearance is required for specific foods that have been categorized as high regulatory interest, or HRI. What this means is that a risk assessment has determined the best place for us to manage the risks from these foods is to stop them and check them at the border. Not all foods need this check, as many foods have risks that are managed in other places or in other ways. Food safety clearance is about preventing illness and risk to human health. We target things that can make people sick, like foods at risk of hepatitis A, norovirus, toxins, and bacteria like salmonella and listeria. The requirements for food safety clearance are outlined in a food notice. The notice lists which foods need clearance and what evidence must be provided to gain clearance. If a food is not listed as an HRI food, it will not need food safety clearance. Clearance requirements might mean you need an official certificate, a third-party certificate, a manufacturer's declaration, or we might need to stop the food and test it before it can be released to the market. Remember, these food safety clearance requirements are separate to the biosecurity clearance requirements, and both need to be met for a food to be imported. As mentioned, only some foods are categorized as high regulatory interest foods and need food safety clearance. These include dairy products, like raw milk cheeses and fresh curd and soft cheeses, meat products, such as beef products and fermented meats, meat pastes, pâtés, and terrines. Seafood, like bivalve molluscan shellfish, chilled ready-to-eat crustacea, smoked fish, and fish susceptible to histamine formation, peanut and pistachios and products that contain them, crushed sesame seed products like tahini and hummus, and dried spices like chili, pepper, and paprika. And finally, frozen, ready-to-eat berries. Now let's look at the biosecurity clearance requirements. Biosecurity clearance is required for all food imported into New Zealand. Biosecurity clearance is about preventing pests and diseases from entering New Zealand. This includes insects, rodents, and reptiles, but also diseases like mad cow disease or foot and mouth disease. The requirements for biosecurity clearance are outlined in the Biosecurity Import Health Standards, also known as IHSs. They document if a food can come in, if the food needs any specific treatments, and what evidence must be provided to gain clearance. If a food is not covered by an IHS, then it cannot be imported. Clearance requirements might need a certificate, a manufacturer's declaration, or a phytosanitary certificate, or it might need to have undergone a treatment before export, or it might need to be inspected or treated once it arrives in New Zealand. Remember, these biosecurity clearance requirements are separate and additional to food safety clearance requirements. Both need to be met for a food to be imported. Let's have a quick look at the border clearance process. First, you submit your import entry into Trade Single Window. This is where you send all your consignment information to Customs and MPI. A freight forwarder or customs broker can usually help with this part if you're unsure. MPI and Customs receive this information at the same time, and we begin our checks. Customs will check things like duties and taxes and other customs requirements. Biosecurity and food safety will also conduct their checks. This includes checking the intended use declaration, if the importer is a registered food importer, as well as if there's any food that needs clearance. If MPI needs more information, we will contact you through TSW and ask you to provide more information. Make sure you respond through TSW. Once each of us has done our checks, we will grant clearance. Once you have all clearances, the food can be released to the market to be sold or move into further processing. You cannot release the food until you get all your clearances, so make sure you check each one. So what does clearance look like? For biosecurity clearance, you will receive a document called a BACC. If you need food safety clearance, which is required for those HRIs we just talked about, you will receive a document called a FACC. This is sent to the importer or your agent. This document can sometimes be used for communication. If we need more information, we might send you one of these asking for more. Make sure you and your agent reads each BACC or FACC to confirm if it is giving directions or granting clearance. As mentioned, food cannot be sold or released to the market until all clearances have been received. You need to make sure you hold the food until you get all your clearances. Clearance requirements can take time. If the food needs to be sampled and tested, this can take several days. Make sure you are prepared to hold the food for the time it takes until clearance is granted. Thanks everyone. Now handing back to Nikki.
Thanks, Ruben. Okay, so are we ready to import? Have we registered as a food importer with MPI and got our customs client code? Have we checked our food by doing our safety and suitability assessments, making sure it meets the food standards code requirements for composition, and that it can be labelled correctly before it is sold? Have we met our responsibilities as a food importer, making sure we have safe storage and transport, are keeping records and have a recall plan in place? And have we checked we can meet the board requirements, both food safety and biosecurity? If you can answer yes to all of the above, then you're ready to import. Now, we've just covered a lot of things at a very high level. What if you have more questions or need some help with the requirements? Everything we've discussed today is outlined in our Food Importer Information Pack. A link to this pack is now being sent out with every food importer registration and renewal. You can find it on our website as well. It covers the steps we've discussed today, includes a handy checklist, and has information on who to contact if you need more help. Additionally, you can contact our Food Importer Advice Service. We are here to help you with your food importing requirement questions. If we can't answer it, we will help direct you to who can. We publish a 3-monthly food importer newsletter. This newsletter is designed to help inform food importers of upcoming changes to requirements, provide helpful information on existing requirements, provide links to guidance and tools for businesses, and inform importers of upcoming events and important information, such as recalls of imported food. You can sign up to this on our website under MPI subscriptions. A link to this is at the bottom of every MPI webpage. This webinar is the first in a series where we'll explore today's topics in more detail. Make sure you're subscribed to our Food Importer newsletter to stay informed about upcoming sessions. So that brings us to the end of our presentation today. We hope this webinar has helped you understand more about what's involved in importing food and where you can go for support. We appreciate your time today. Ngā mihi and enjoy the rest of your day.